According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual Homeless Assessment Report, as of 2017, there are around 554,000 homeless people in the United States on a given night. But how did we get here? It's 1870, and the United States has just entered what would later be known as the Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner to show how, to some, the United States might have seemed like a land of opportunity, wealth, and prosperity, but to others, it was a fractious land in which a sense of desperation amidst growing wealth was emerging. The term homelessness was first used in the United States during the 1870s. It was meant to describe those who were wandering the country in search for work, and was described as a crisis of men let loose from all the habits of domestic life, wandering without aim or home. The Industrial Revolution ushered in a shift from the individual living and surviving on farms or working in skilled trades to the wage-earning worker dependent upon wealthy employers. Facilitated by the construction of the National Railroad system, urbanization, industrialization, and mobility led to the emergence of people riding the rails in search of jobs. The word hobo first appeared in the 1880s in Western America and softened the public's perception of homeless individuals. This culture of migrant laborers was often romanticized in American literature. The storied hobo culture was popularized by Chicago sociologist Nels Anderson in the 1920s as hobohemia. In 1929, the United States entered the worst economic crisis of the country's history. The Great Depression brought a whole new light to the term homelessness. About 2 million Americans were homeless, and shantytowns called Hoovervilles were popping up all over the country as unemployed people were evicted from their homes. Additionally, as the Dust Bowl continued to spread tragedy through the Great Plains, many tenant farmers native to the plains were forced to migrate in search of a new home and job, but they were often not received with open arms by locals. But what is being done? The 1980s marks the start of what could be considered as the modern era of homelessness. Major forces that change the complexion of homelessness in the modern era include gentrification of the inner city, deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill, high unemployment rate, the emergence of HIV and AIDS, an inadequate supply of affordable housing options, and deep budget cuts to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and social service agencies in response to what was then the country's worst recession since the Great Depression.
My husband and I came here from Las Vegas thinking that we had an apartment, and when we got here, it was just way too expensive to live, and we tried to get into one of the shelters, and they were full.
How bad is it out here on the street?
Someone who could be your friend at 6 o'clock at night can be fiending for drugs and at midnight kill you because they know you have a couple dollars in your pocket that they want.
Would you have ever imagined that you would be living on the street, homeless?
At 48, my mom died, and I lost my mind. I had a nervous breakdown, and that's the first time I actually became homeless. I lost my house, my school, my career, everything. My income was barely paying the rent. We were depending on my mom, who was elderly, to cover the bills, and when that wasn't there anymore, I couldn't afford anything. It really brought a huge battle of depression to me. There's still not a day goes by that I don't wish that I could die and be with her.
Prior to the late 19th century, the problem of homelessness was in the hands of local and state authorities, but eventually the federal government began to take action on the homelessness crisis. During the early 20th century, providing jobs was viewed as the solution, such as Franklin Roosevelt did by creating the Works Progress Administration, which roughly put 8.5 million Americans back to work out of the 13 million that had been recorded as unemployed. The 1997 Stuart B. McKinney Act authorized the creation of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, an independent executive branch established to better coordinate homelessness programs across government agencies. And in 2002, the USICH spearheaded the Chronic Homelessness Initiative, asking state and local jurisdictions to create a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, which, as defined by the federal government as an unaccompanied homeless individual with a disabling condition who has either been continuously homeless for a year or more or has had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. In 2010, President Obama's administration introduced Opening Doors, a federal strategic plan to end homelessness. The plan established 4 key goals. 1. To prevent and end homelessness among veterans in 5 years. 2. Finishing the job of ending chronic homelessness in 7 years. 3. Prevent and end homelessness for families, youth, and children in 10 years. And 4. Set a path to ending all types of homelessness. Since 2010, the nation has seen a 23% drop in homeless families, a 27% drop in individuals experiencing chronic homelessness, and a 47% drop in veteran homelessness across the country. But individual areas such as New York and Los Angeles have only rose in their homeless population. How can the government improve? The federal government has relied too much on state and local government to help aid the homelessness crisis in the U.S. Regionally, homelessness appears to be moving out west to states like California, Washington, and Colorado, and cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle rank in first, second, and third for highest homeless population in the country, and with over 10 cities on the West Coast having declared a state of emergency since 2015 regarding the high homeless population. One of the reasons why so many homeless people are moving to other locations is to take advantage of the local services like shelters and addiction clinics in the hope of getting a job or to be close to family.
My name is Ronald Davis. I've been on the street for about a year and a half now. Well, I come from the suburbs. Life, which is rough. And I done slept in Lower Wacker. I done slept on the bridges. I done slept in little cardboard boxes and stuff, just surviving, especially in the wintertime is the hardest time. And I go to fill out applications for a job and stuff. They look at me, I'm not looking presentable, and then we'll call you, leave a number. But how can I leave a number when I don't have a phone? I start out my morning about 6 o'clock. Sometimes I don't even have enough to go to the flop house. Sometimes the flop house is a cheap place and they number $16 for 24 hours right over there on Clark and Van Buren. And a lot of times I don't have enough money for that, so I had to end up sleeping in the park or on one of these benches downtown or something like this. And then the security guards come and run you off about 5 or 6 in the morning. So by 6 o'clock I started to panhandling and trying to survive.
But homeless mobility creates a big problem for local governments. When homeless people can move around, they tend to move to places with more generous policies, such as better shelters and more social workers. That creates an incentive for cities to skimp on services, since generosity will simply encourage homeless inflows that strain local tax revenues. Instead of caring for their homeless, a lot of cities are shipping them elsewhere. Smaller and poorer towns are often the ones to suffer as influxes of homeless people put a strain on their more limited social services and smaller tax bases. When homelessness is a problem to be solved by local governments alone, there is every reason to ship them out rather than care for them. The way to solve the problem isn't to shame and scold the bad morals of local leaders. It's to change the incentive system that forces their hand. For this reason, the federal government, not local governments, should be responsible for ending homelessness in the United States. By some estimates, housing a homeless person and providing them with a caseworker to see to their needs costs about $10,000 a year. That means that for less than $1 billion a year, chronic homelessness could be ended in the U.S. If temporarily homeless people were housed in temporary housing, and if each temporary residence was occupied half of the time, homelessness of all kinds could be eliminated for about $10 billion a year. That's less than a seventh of what the government spends on food stamps. Only the federal government can fix the tragedy playing out on the country streets. Why should we as Catholics care? In Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40, it says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?' The king will answer and say to them, 'Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me.'" As good followers of Christ, we should want to follow God's most important laws, which are to love God above all things and to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. And by taking care of one another, as Jesus says in the Gospel of Matthew, we do both. By loving God's creation, we love God.
What was the toughest part of being out on the street?
Instability.
Was the key to your survival getting housing, sustainable housing?
Yes, because I had no faith and belief in myself. It gave me back my dignity and my self-respect. And that's the main thing out here, is we have to do that. We have to let people know that they are worthy and they're not just bodies of flesh.